Good evening. I'm Judy Woodruff. On the NewsHour tonight, President Trump claims to be the victim of a witch hunt as the Justice Department appoints a special counsel to investigate possible Russian ties to the Trump campaign. Then we travel to Iran ahead of a pivotal presidential election there. Plus, part 2 of our look at how gender stereotypes influence the jobs we take. Meet the football coach who teaches 2nd grade.
Everybody looking like, hey, what you doing here? You know, this isn't PE, anything. And I'm just like, I know, it's reading, how to teach kids how to read, and that's what I'm here for, to learn that.
All that and more on tonight's PBS NewsHour. President Trump is rejecting the need for an independent investigator into his alleged ties with Russia. He's also again denying any wrongdoing in connection with Russia. He spoke out today as a newly appointed special counsel began looking into just that. William Brangham begins our coverage.
Well, I respect the move, but the entire thing has been a witch hunt.
The president's displeasure with the naming of a special counsel was crystal clear at his joint White House news conference with the visiting president of Colombia.
There is no collusion between certainly myself and my campaign, but I can always speak for myself and the Russians, zero. I think it divides the country. I think we have a very divided country because of that and many other things.
In a sudden shift last night, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein appointed former FBI Director Robert Mueller to investigate Russian meddling in the election, alleged collusion with the Trump campaign, and any other related matters that may arise. Rosenstein said he acted to restore the public's trust. That trust was certainly tested in a series of bombshell developments in recent days. First, there was the president's sudden firing of FBI Director James Comey last week. Then, reports that Mr. Trump leaked classified information about the Islamic State group to Russian diplomats. And finally, allegations that he urged Comey back in February to drop the investigation of Michael Flynn. Flynn had just been fired as National Security Advisor for lying about his contacts with the Russians. The president was asked directly about Comey today.
Did you at any time urge former FBI Director James Comey in any way, shape, or form to close or to back down the investigation into Michael Flynn? And also, as you look back...
No. Next question.
As you look back over the past 6 months or year, have you had any recollection where you've wondered if anything you have done has been something that might be worthy of criminal charges?
I think it's totally ridiculous. Everybody thinks so.
Democrats had for weeks pressed for an independent commission or special counsel, and most welcomed Mueller's selection.
Mr. Rosenstein has done the right thing. I applaud his decision for both its correctness and its courage. I now have significantly greater confidence that the investigation will follow the facts, wherever they lead.
Most Republicans had resisted naming a special counsel, but today, House Speaker Paul Ryan and others applauded the move.
The appointment of the special counsel, I think, helps assure people and the Justice Department that they're going to go do their jobs independently and thoroughly, which is what we've called for all along.
Robert Mueller is perhaps the single most qualified individual to lead such an investigation, in my view, and he's certainly independent.
Mueller ran the FBI for 12 years, taking over just days before the 9/11 attacks, and served both Democratic and Republican presidents. Journalist Garrett Graff is the author of a Mueller biography.
Bob Mueller's entire history is as a tenacious prosecutor, and so he will follow the Russia investigation wherever it leads. But the good news for Donald Trump is he's also the only person, perhaps in America, who could end up declaring that there's no there and having people believe that.
Back at the Capitol this afternoon, Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein briefed the full Senate in a closed session on the firing of Comey and the handling of the Russia investigation. Rosenstein wrote the memo that the president used as a basis to dismiss Comey. Missouri Democrat Claire McCaskill says Rosenstein acknowledged that the memo he wrote on Comey was not, in fact, what triggered the firing.
He did acknowledge that he learned Comey would be removed prior to him writing his memo.
Say that again? He knew that Comey was going to be removed
prior to him writing his memo.
Republican Lindsey Graham praised the Mueller selection, but also voiced misgivings.
You couldn't have picked a better man to do the job, and I think most people in that meeting are generally okay with the idea of a special counsel, but what they don't quite understand yet is I think this decision has really limited what Congress can do.
All of this as new revelations surfaced about Michael Flynn. The New York Times reports the Trump transition team knew Flynn was under investigation weeks before the inauguration for secretly working as a paid lobbyist for Turkey. The McClatchy News Service reported that during the transition, Flynn blocked a military plan against the Islamic State that was opposed by Turkey. It was later approved after his ouster. And Reuters reports Flynn and other Trump campaign advisors had contact with Russian officials at least 18 times during the last 7 months of the presidential campaign. Meanwhile, the House Intelligence Committee became the latest congressional panel to ask for more documents on the ouster of Comey and his conversations with the president. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm William Brangham.
And we turn now to our Lisa Desjardins on Capitol Hill and John Yang at the White House. Lisa, I'm going to start with you. We were just hearing from those senators as they came out of the briefing with the Deputy Attorney General. What more are you hearing from that?
Right. Those senators emerged with one unified theme, that the Deputy Attorney General was a very cautious man, and he on many questions actually deferred, saying he couldn't answer them, that it was up to the new special counsel Mueller. Now, Judy, that left Republicans, they said, with a sense of confidence that here was a Deputy Attorney General who's trying to remove politics and Congress from this investigation. Democrats, however, they were frustrated. They said they're worried that as this goes forward, they may not get many details about what is happening with this investigation.
And Lisa, other questions the senators were asking today?
The big one, they asked repeatedly, who told Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein to write that letter about why FBI Director Comey should be fired? They asked him again and again, and we're told he did not answer. So that's a question still in the air.
And John, at the White House, they were fielding questions about a new FBI director. I know I was there. The president had a session with television news anchors. But clearly, one of the questions on their mind is getting to the choice of this new FBI director.
That's right, and at a photo opportunity with the Colombian president, he repeated what he told you and the other anchors at lunch, that he expects to name a new FBI director very soon. Now, he doesn't say exactly what that means, if that's going to be as soon as before he leaves on his first foreign trip tomorrow afternoon. And aides say that he's holding this rather close to his vest, but he has indicated that Joe Lieberman is a leading candidate. Lieberman said that this is a bit of a surprise to him. He came in, spoke to the president yesterday afternoon. He said he didn't seek this, that he had been invited to come speak to the president just the day before. This would not only be something of a bipartisan selection, but sort of a pan-partisan selection. He, of course, was Al Gore's running mate on the Democratic ticket in 2000. He ran for re-election after losing the Democratic primary as an independent in 2006. And then 2008 sort of broke with the party, went to the Republican convention and endorsed John McCain against President Barack Obama's re-election campaign.
Right. Of course, Lieberman, a longtime Democratic senator from the state of Connecticut. So, Lisa, what's the reaction on the Hill to this talk?
Right. It's another one of these reverse worlds. Democrats who would have elected Lieberman as vice president told me today they're not sure he should be FBI director. They said again and again they think it should be someone who has never held elected office, someone outside of politics. Republicans, on the other hand, say they love the choice of Joe Lieberman. In particular, John McCain said on the question of experience, quote, to me, Joe Lieberman has more experience than the rest of my Democratic colleagues combined, and you can quote me.
And just quickly to John, the White House trying to turn the focus today to the president's overseas trip, which starts tomorrow.
This is a big trip, 8 days, 4 nations, and sort of high stakes anytime the president goes overseas. But I think for the first trip for a president, it's always closely watched. The planning seems to be a little ragged. They've been having a little trouble getting the details, all the details that the television networks in particular need to have in order so that they can plan, so that they can bring that the pictures of that trip back to the United States. But ready or not, he leaves tomorrow afternoon. First stop, Saudi Arabia.
And we'll be talking about that some more in a few minutes. John Yang at the White House, Lisa Desjardins at the Capitol. Thank you. And in the day's other news, the chairman of the House of Representatives Oversight Committee, Jason Chaffetz, announced that he's resigning from Congress at the end of June. His decision came as the committee is investigating the Trump campaign's contacts with Russia. The Utah Republican said that he wants to spend more time with his family and possibly run for governor. One person was killed and 22 hurt in New York's Times Square today when a car plowed into pedestrians. The driver, a 26-year-old Navy veteran, was taken into custody and underwent tests for alcohol and drugs. The car drove the wrong way up a street and then up on the sidewalk for 3 blocks and finally came to rest with 2 wheels in the air. Police said there is no indication that terrorism was involved. The founder of Fox News, Roger Ailes, died today in Palm Beach, Florida, several days after hitting his head in a fall at his home. He transformed the business and built the network into a dominant presence, but his career ended in scandal. PJ Tobia has our report.
Today, America lost one of its great patriotic warriors.
Fox News Channel announced the death of the cable network's longtime leader.
He has dramatically and forever changed the political and the media landscape single-handedly for the better. Neither will ever be the same again, as he was a true American original.
Ailes left a huge imprint on both American politics and media. He created the 24-hour Fox News network in 1996 from scratch to compete with CNN and other TV networks he saw as too liberal. Within a few short years, Fox dominated cable and helped shape politics with its fair and balanced credo. Fox News would have an explicitly conservative take to its coverage.
Fair, balanced.
Ailes said this in a 2004 interview with C-SPAN's Brian Lamb.
Well, we've changed the business a little bit. I think Fox News has come on the scene and identified itself as fair and balanced. We try to do that every day. I think others, instead of trying to get more fair and balanced, probably are offended by that or worried about it.
And now, here's the... Early in his career, Ailes helped launch a little-known big band singer named Mike Douglas, who became a household name with his afternoon variety show. It was there that Ailes first met Richard Nixon. Ailes offered to become Nixon's media advisor before he ran for president a second time in 1968. He would go on to advise and work for the winning candidacies of Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Mr. Bush tweeted today, "He wasn't perfect, but Roger Ailes was my friend and I loved him. Not sure I would have been president without his great talent. Loyal help, rest in peace." Ailes also served as a one-time advisor to Donald Trump. After falling out, the two men mended fences in 2016 when Ailes jumped on the Trump bandwagon. At Fox, Ailes reigned supreme for 2 decades. But after sexual harassment allegations by former anchor Gretchen Carlson became public last year, Ailes' career and legacy began to unravel. More than 20 other women came forward with allegations. So far, 21st Century Fox has paid $45 million in relation to those charges, with more pending. 21st Century Fox corporate head Rupert Murdoch and his sons ousted Ailes last July, only hours before Mr. Trump accepted the GOP nomination. Roger Ailes was 77 years old.
Late today, the medical examiner in Palm Beach County, Florida, said that Ailes died of bleeding on the brain. The U.S. Treasury Department is imposing new sanctions on Venezuela. They are aimed at the chief judge and 7 other members of the country's Supreme Court. It is retaliation for the court's rulings against the opposition-controlled Congress. The rulings have triggered ongoing protests and violence. The Trump administration formally alerted Congress today of its plans to renegotiate NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. The president initially threatened to pull out of the 23-year-old trade pact with Mexico and Canada. He has said since that he hopes to negotiate a better deal. Today's announcement came as Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and his Mexican counterpart met in Washington.
Trade is an important, extremely important issue, and I think the filing of the authorities with the Congress this morning to start moving towards fast-track authority is a very positive move.
The government of Mexico welcomes this development. We are prepared, we are ready, and this is to work together with both the governments of the U.S. and Canada to make our trade agreement better.
The announcement sets in motion 90 days of consultations with Congress, and then negotiations begin with Mexico and Canada. And on Wall Street, stocks managed a minor rally after yesterday's drubbing. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 56 points to close at 20,663. The Nasdaq rose nearly 44, and the S&P 500 added 8. Still to come on the NewsHour, what's at stake during President Trump's trip abroad? The choice between moderate and hard-line candidates in Iran's upcoming presidential election, and much more. We return now to the investigations into Russia's role in last year's election and any relationship with the Trump campaign. Senator Angus King of Maine attended this afternoon's closed briefing with the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. Senator King sits on the Select Committee on Intelligence, and he joins us now from Capitol Hill. Senator King, thank you very much for joining us. A lot of people have many questions for the Deputy Attorney General. What did you learn from today's briefing?
Well, I think there were a couple of things that we learned. One that came out actually in his opening statement, which I think caught everybody a little bit by surprise. He said that he learned that President Trump had intended to fire Director Comey before he wrote the memo, which of course was then used later on by the White House and by President Trump in his letter to Director Comey as the justification for the firing. And he was asked about it 2 or 3 times, he mentioned it in his opening statement, and that was a little bit surprising. I mean, we knew that the White House changed the justification for the firing. President Trump changed it himself 2 or 3 days later, but at the time, the whole argument was the firing was based upon the memo.
Right.
Now we learned that the firing decision had been made before the memo was written.
Did he then explain, did the Deputy Attorney General go on to explain why he did so, why he wrote the memo?
Well, he didn't. He wouldn't answer questions about any details about why he wrote it, who contributed to it, whether there were edits. And this was sort of the second thing that came out of the meeting, because he said this may be part of Robert Mueller's investigation. The whole firing of Comey may be part of that investigation, so therefore I can't talk about it, which I think that was also somewhat surprising, that he views the scope of Robert Mueller's investigation as pretty broad, which now apparently includes the circumstances surrounding the firing of James Comey.
Senator, this is a subjective question, but did you get the sense from Mr. Rosenstein that he feels he may have done something wrong here?
No, I didn't. He was not apologetic. He was quite assertive, actually, and he stood by his memo. But then when he was pressed about why did you write it and how did it actually come about and who talked about it, that's when he said, I can't answer that question. And he said that probably 10 times because this may be part of Robert Mueller's FBI investigation.
What does that tell you, though, Senator, about how much the Senate Intelligence Committee, any of these investigative committees, are going to be able to find out if that's going to be the answer you get as you try to get to the bottom of some of these hard questions?
Well, I don't think that's necessarily the answer that we're going to get, particularly in a closed session. By the way, I'm not sure why this session today was closed. I don't think there was anything said that was classified. At least I didn't hear it. And he stated himself that the opening statement that I cited was not classified. But we will be having sessions. In fact, one of the things I talked with one of the members of the committee right after the meeting this afternoon. Our committee has to sit down with Robert Mueller and talk about how we will coordinate the 2 investigations. We don't want to get in each other's way. We don't want to offer immunity or have them offer immunity that would compromise either one of our investigations. But basically, you have 2 investigations running in parallel. The FBI is a law enforcement agency, and they're looking at whether laws were broken in this country. We're a fact-finding agency or committee, and we will as I say, the two investigations are running in the same direction, and we're going to try to deconflict and be in touch as we move forward. And I think that's certainly possible to do.
Well, that's my question. How concerned are you that you're going to be able to do that, given what you're already discovering today from Mr. Rosenstein?
Well, he was reluctant. I mean, he wasn't answering questions because he said this may be part of this investigation. We're going to be talking to Director Mueller about the investigation. So I think we're going to be able to get the information that we need. We've gotten good cooperation thus far from the FBI, from the CIA, from the NSA, from the other intelligence agencies. I don't think this is going to be a problem, but it's one that it's going to take some discussion and some work in order to be sure that we are not stepping on each other's toes, because we're all headed in the same direction. And remember, this investigation, all the attention is to the Trump campaign. This is about a foreign government interfering in our democratic process. And let's always remember that that's what it is, and that's why it's so important.
But is it also about a potential obstruction of justice or a potential effort to stop an investigation that might be harming the president?
Well, I'm not going to, I mean, that's going to be part of the investigation. That's certainly what the Deputy Attorney General indicated today, was that the investigation that the FBI is going to undertake, or is undertaking, it's been going on for some time, is going to be very broad in scope. So all the facts are going to be on the table. And whenever you begin an investigation, you never know exactly where it's going to lead or what the facts are going to be. But my goal is to get the information so that ultimately we can report to the American people, and hopefully a lot of our hearings will be in public, so the American people will travel this road with us. What happened, why it happened, how it happened, and most importantly, how do we keep it from happening again? Judy, this is not a one-off for the Russians. This is what they do. And they are going to try to continue to be involved in our democratic process here, whether it's state election processes or national elections. And we've got to figure out how to defend ourselves.
So just finally, Senator, today President Trump said again that he has no business dealings with Russia, no connections with Russia. Is that in any sense reassuring to you?
Well, if that were the end of the matter, we would all have to say we're not going to do these investigations. But clearly, there's information that we need to get to the bottom of, and so I'm delighted that he takes that position, and hope that he's proven correct. In fact, if that's true, if he is correct, then they should be falling all over themselves to help us with this investigation in order to clear the air on this. But we've got to follow the facts in order to reassure the American people as to what went on here.
But as I'm sure you know, the president today called it all a witch hunt, said that people are after information that he said is a big waste of time.
I would not participate in a witch hunt, Judy, nor would I participate in a whitewash. This is a very serious matter, and it deserves serious work and consideration, and that's what we're going to do.
Senator Angus King, a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Senator, thank you.
Thank you, Judy.
President Trump, as we've been reporting, leaves tomorrow for his first overseas trip, and it is a long, intense schedule. He'll travel to Saudi Arabia, Israel, the West Bank, the Vatican for an audience with the Pope, on to NATO headquarters in Brussels, and finally, next Friday, to Sicily for a G7 meeting. A short time ago, I spoke to two people with lengthy experience in American diplomacy and foreign affairs: former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, who served in the Bill Clinton administration, and Stephen Hadley, who was George W. Bush's national security advisor. I started by asking Secretary Albright about her expectations for the president's ambitious trip.
Well, I think it's a very complicated trip. Just think about it. Going to Saudi Arabia, meeting with a lot of Muslim leaders as well as the leadership there, then in Israel, then meeting with President Abbas, then going to Rome, the Vatican, to meet with the Pope, then going to NATO, then the G7. What could possibly go wrong? And it is a very tiring trip. And I think the question is, what is the purpose of it in terms of showing support for what's going on in the Middle East? And I think the question is what they want to accomplish. But I think it has, I don't think we should have a low bar for it, however, because there's an awful lot that needs to be done. It's just a very long trip.
Do you think, Steve Hadley, the possibilities for success are greater than the pitfalls? I'm reading a lot in the coverage of running up to the trip that the expectation is there are many places where there could be a problem.
Well, yes and no. I mean, it'll be the first time that the world will see President Trump as president on the world stage. It's important that it succeeds for him and for our country that it succeeds. I think the first part of the trip, you know, the people in the Middle East really want to have a strong relationship with this administration, want our policy to go in a little bit of a different direction, being a little more confrontational with Iran, being a little more aggressive against ISIS, reconnecting with the traditional allies. And so I think Israel, Saudi, the Palestinians, they all have an interest in making this trip successful for their own purposes. And, you know, meeting with the Pope, you know, is usually a win for any president. So I think the first half of the trip ought to go pretty well. More concerned about late in the trip when the president's a little tired, more problematic meeting with the EU, meeting with NATO. G7, again, probably ought to be a little downhill because it's with our traditional friends and allies. So but it's going to be grueling. It's a long period of time. The president hasn't done this kind of trip as president. The days are long in the agenda. So it's going to be, this is not easy, but he's someone who's, you know, knows how to be in front of the camera and is comfortable being in that position. So I think it'll probably go pretty well.
Secretary Albright, so while the president is taking off on this trip, a lot of controversy he's leaving behind here at home over the firing of the FBI director, the naming of a special counsel to look into the potential Russia connections between his campaign, the leaking, alleged leaking of classified information to Russian officials by the president himself. How much does all that back home hang over a trip when a president travels?
I think it definitely does hang on. But the other part that I think people don't recognize often, you take press with you, and it's American press. And I know from various times that I traveled is issues that are going on at home are asked by the American reporters. And so it's very hard to insulate yourself from that. And the question will be, I think he can probably be very calm in terms of talking about what the foreign policy agenda is. He may get irritated at some of the way that the questions are asked about what's going on at home. And then it isn't as if the Russians are just going to be silent. They are having a very good time kind of observing the turbulence that's going on. And in something that you ran yesterday, it was very clear that they said they look at the turbulence of information with pleasure.
Steve Hadley, what about this question about so much smoke, controversy here at home? How much do those headlines and does that follow him, the president, when he travels?
As Madeline says, it follows him because he takes a press corps with him. And I think in all these trips, the press is more interested in asking the president questions about the issues that are driving the debate in Washington and less interested in asking about the trip, which is the challenge, to try to get their message through in terms of this trip. And they will do it by what the president says about the meetings, about the visuals, about the deliverables come to the trip. But the challenge will be to get the message from the trip and the success they hope to get from the trip to make it back to the United States and back to the American people over the effort by the press to make it all about what's going on in Washington.
Well, one of the things, I was at a briefing at the White House today, Secretary Albright, and they are talking about, you know, how pleased they are to be bringing together so many Muslim countries to step up the fight against terrorism. If that's what they're able to do with this meeting in Saudi Arabia, how significant is that?
Well, I think it would be significant, but it's not easy. And basically, if they have all the Muslims, there will be Sunni and Shia, which is that then reflected in their relationship with Iran. Iran will be a sub-subject no matter what, because especially, I think whenever we've been with the Saudis, it's very clear that that is their #1 nemesis. And so the question is how the president works his way through that. I do think that what Steve said is absolutely right, is the Saudis want to have a good meeting. They're about to get a very large deliverable, which is an arms sale, and then they want to be the center of new activity. Actually, I think, Steve, they might have read our report in terms of, we were talking about the importance of having a regional organization. They are talking, and so is the president, about doing something about that. So they do want to make it work. But the Muslim part of this is complicated, especially since there are Muslims who believe that President Trump doesn't like Muslims. And if I were a journalist, I would ask about the ban.
Well, and which the president talked about during the campaign, but has soft-pedaled as president. Steve Hadley, if the administration is able to pull something together in the way of an announcement from a group of Muslim countries that they're spending more on counterterrorism, how significant?
I think it'll be significant, and I think what the president is going to try to do, and I think one of the most important pieces of this trip, I understand he's going to give a speech in Saudi Arabia. I think that speech will be very important. I think what they want to do is to show that they are working with and rallying the Muslim world to be in solidarity against the extremists. To have the capabilities to cut off their money and to really be in solidarity and committed in a way that many Americans think Muslim countries in that region have not been committed against terrorism. If he can come back with that message, I think that's a win for him.
Is that something, though, that makes a difference in the fight against terrorism?
Well, I think it would if it really has everybody working together. I do think it's very important to get the Muslim community to recognize that ISIS has hijacked a religion that is a peaceful religion. So, but I think the difficulties of writing a speech such as this one, and kind of touching the bases and using the right adjectives and a number of different things that we've all been through, it's not going to be simple. I do think that there are possibilities here. The whole kind of Arab initiative initially on the Middle East peace process, the extent to which the president is willing to get into that. But there is nothing more dangerous than making a mistake on some of the issues, because they all have a great history, and you really do have to study it. I think we did, and so that's the question about how much homework the president has done.
And just quickly, Steve Hadley, that is another message coming from the White House today, from White House officials saying they have high hopes that, yes, it's just the beginning, but they do believe they can start to make progress on an Israeli-Palestinian agreement.
I think that's right, and I think we shouldn't have too exaggerated expectations of this trip. I think you ought to think about it as it's a debut for the president to show himself as president of the world stage and to try to set the table now for some initiatives and strategies that will be fully developed in the weeks and months ahead that might achieve some of these objectives. If they can do those two things, it'll be a successful trip.
Well, we will all be watching very
And I think
closely.
we wish him well for the United
Absolutely.
States, for the sake of the United States and the Middle East.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Secretary Madeleine Albright, Steve Hadley.
Nice to be with you.
The people of Iran go to the polls tomorrow to vote in a controlled but still heated presidential election. From Tehran, special correspondent Reza Saya reports.
It's the closing stretch in Iran's presidential race, and the capital Tehran is at fever pitch. From the streets to sports arenas and campaign headquarters, the candidates' foot soldiers make a final push to win over voters. It's an election that will pit liberals versus conservatives, determine domestic policy, and shape Iran's relations with the West. Zainab Asgharpour wants another 4 years from incumbent President Hassan Rouhani.
These last days can make a huge difference. It's up to us to whip up excitement. If we do that, God willing, we'll have good results.
Rouhani's government signed the historic nuclear deal with the U.S. and other world powers in 2015, the first agreement involving Washington and Tehran since Iran's 1979 revolution. The deal lifted international sanctions, giving Iran access to global markets.
Have them tell you what they've done for the past 38 years. What I've done in the past 4 years is quite clear.
But Iran's economy is still struggling. The moderate reformer and his supporters say, let's be patient and move forward.
Maybe we didn't have an actual war, but there was a domestic struggle. We faced harsh sanctions. People suffered to survive. The last thing we want is to go backwards.
But Rouhani's supporters are nervous. There is a serious conservative challenge. Hardline cleric Ebrahim Raisi. Come this weekend, Rouhani is gone, cries rally leader Mahdi Armaghani.
We believe we are standing by the side of God, and God will definitely stand by us.
Raisi is Iran's former top prosecutor, linked to mass executions of political dissidents in 1988. He's never been elected to office, but is backed by the clerical establishment, an important endorsement. Some say he's being groomed to succeed Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. In campaign speeches, Raisi accuses Rouhani of ignoring the poor and failing to deliver on the promised benefits of the nuclear agreement.
Most of our challenges can be solved with our nation's resources, our potential, strong leadership, our people's revolutionary values.
At this Raisi rally, a film taunts President Rouhani, suggesting he sold out his revolutionary values to cozy up to Washington.
All these sanctions are in place. We lost our dignity. There's no doubt it's time for change.
Raisi's backers are mostly conservative, devoted to Iran's revolutionary values, and deeply suspicious of the West.
His main attention will be on us, will be inside the borders.
Some still chant death to America. Rouhani supporters want to silence those chants. They demand social and political reform and better relations with the West. They say a vote for Raisi is a return to isolation and confrontation.
America is bad, but it's not all bad. If we keep fighting and beating ourselves up, nothing will ever get done.
Tehran-based political analyst Mohammad Marandi says President Donald Trump's aggressive tone towards Iran, coupled with some U.S. sanctions still in effect, have put Rouhani's re-election in jeopardy. Just this week, the Trump administration imposed new sanctions against Iran over its ballistic missile program.
They have not abided by their side of the bargain, and by doing so, they've hurt President Rouhani, his credibility.
Marandi says no matter who wins the vote, U.S.-Iran relations will remain icy, and he says there is little chance of confrontation.
The Iranians recognize that the United States is in a very difficult position, that it cannot launch another war. I don't think that there's any chance of military conflict.
In northern Tehran this week, this has been a nightly ritual. People in cars, on foot, making a lot of noise for their favorite candidate. Maybe one of the most surprising aspects of this campaign is how tolerant security forces have been. People are able to gather, demonstrate, and chant slogans, even slogans that were very taboo just 8 years ago.
When an estimated 25,000 Rouhani supporters packed Tehran's main sports arena this week, the loudest cheers were for Mir Hossein Mousavi, the reformist candidate whose defeat in 2009 sparked mass protest by the Green Movement. The government crushed the protest, but the color green sits next to the Rouhani campaign's purple banners, still symbolizing the demand for democratic change. No matter who voters are supporting, their number one demand is for the next president to make life more affordable.
I think that the important thing for Iranians right now is the state of the economy.
3 out of 10 young Iranians don't have jobs. Many can't afford to get married or buy a home. Rouhani wants more time to fix the economy.
The lifting of international sanctions increased oil sales and curbed inflation. But the billions of dollars in foreign investment President Rouhani promised have yet to arrive.
Raisi says he'll fight corruption, build low-income housing, and double cash subsidies to the poor. Former banker and economic analyst Sadegh Samii says Iran's economy will continue to struggle as long as U.S. sanctions continue to block Iran from the international banking system.
If I want to transfer $1,000 for my children to Canada through the banking system is impossible. Even European banks are afraid of being fined by the U.S. treasuries in order if they work with Iran. Without the Western money, without the Western banking system, nothing can possibly function in this country.
No incumbent president in Iran has failed to win a second term since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Zainab Asgharpour and fellow Rouhani supporters roam Tehran streets, pleading for voters to keep that streak alive. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Reza Sayah in Tehran.
Now, special correspondent Charlene Hunter-Gault has a story on how a once segregated pocket of a small southern town is making a comeback. It's part of our Race Matters series.
The city's historic African-American business district, known as the Hot Corner, helped foster commerce in a place once steeped in segregation. Athens native Homer Wilson, who owns a popular barbershop, explains how the Hot Corner developed in the Jim Crow era.
All black from, we call it the bottom, all the way down. It was just black business. And
what kind of businesses?
Funeral home business, dentists, lawyers, motels, you name it.
That was essential for the black community, which had few other choices and couldn't use the then white-only businesses uptown.
56 years ago, when I was one of the first 2 black students at the University of Georgia, I couldn't come into Athens and go to a movie theater like this. I couldn't even take bowling because the bowling alley was here and it was segregated.
But after flourishing, many Hot Corner businesses moved to malls farther out during the 70s or died. Homer Wilson held on to his family's property, home to Wilson Soul Food, for 3 decades, and then...
This is your place here?
41-year-old David Eduardo came knocking in search of a place to rent for his restaurant he calls the world famous.
Thank you.
The Hot Corner is a great place to do business.
What drew you to it?
The fact that there was a restaurant there before that had a strong 30-plus year run of success. Was very encouraging. They had a great reputation, and we could only hope to be half as successful as they were.
So you went to Mr. Wilson and said...
And begged him for the opportunity to open up shop next door.
And what did you think about that, Mr. Wilson? White boy coming in?
Well, he wasn't the first one. So we had a great chance to rent it to a lot of people, but David was more persistent.
And the fact that it was so coveted is not lost on me. I know that with that space comes tremendous responsibility. And history. So we have to be good stewards for the community. I'm very, very happy that the Wilson family gave us the green light.
A green light to gentrification, a turnoff to those who helped build this area, but the spreading of the welcome mat to people from new communities.
You have cuisine from around the world, our live entertainment. On any given night, you could find hip-hop, comedy, singer-songwriters. We want to be a place for everyone, not just anyone.
This end of town is coming back to where it used to be, where we had all this stuff that go on Hot Corner.
Both men agree the Hot Corner, rich in history, good and bad, is a special place.
The spirit that who owned this place makes people mix and mingle different down here than they do other places. This togetherness, it can work if we can learn to supply the right information to people.
Like what?
It's all right to be white. It's all right to be black.
Amen. I would encourage folks to get outside of their comfort zone. Folks from all cultural backgrounds, genders, socioeconomic classes, they gravitate to this side of town. It's a very welcoming environment, I think.
Where once people were kept from mixing, now the hot corner has become a hot spot for all. In Athens, Georgia, I'm Charlene Hunter-Gault for the PBS NewsHour.
A question that's been raised here: why aren't more men going into fields dominated by women? Stigma is a big part of the answer, our economics correspondent Paul Salmon reported last week. Tonight, he focuses on one man many might want to emulate. It's part of our weekly series, Making Sense.
We already got a man outside. No need for you to be outside, especially at will linebacker.
Harold Johnson coaches linebackers for the Ridgeview Blazers in Columbia, South Carolina, where high school football is a rite of masculine passage.
You start getting tired, then you get lazy in your mindset. Now, hey, you can't think. You have to be focused. You have to get control of your breathing.
Amos Miles is the bad cop, but Harold Johnson isn't exactly the good one.
No, you attack downhill first. You don't never attack lateral playing linebacker. Downhill first.
Pretty much every high school football coach is a guy, of course. And men are no rarity in secondary school classrooms either.
If he tries to arc step and reach you.
It's about 40% of male teachers at high school level.
But in elementary school, says educator Angela Baum, the percentage is minuscule.
Between 1% and 5% of early childhood teachers are male.
Do you guys like having a man teacher?
Yeah! Their teacher is Harold Johnson, the linebacker coach, whose main job turns out to be running this second grade classroom after 6 years teaching kindergarten. Early education teacher is a job for which, given the labor market for men, especially in the South, qualified guys would be hired right away. Harold Johnson has taken advantage ever since college.
I just decided I want to be an early childhood major.
Smart move, he learned, as good male gigs were proving ever harder to come by in the wake of the crash of '08.
The dean of the colleges came in to just greet all the freshmen and stuff, and he kind of walked in and he looked around and he was giving his speech. He just stopped me. His speech was like, "Hey, that guy right there gonna get a job for all y'all." And so I just laughed, and I was looking around like, me? And he was just like, "Yeah, it's you."
But 8 years later, Coach Johnson still has surprisingly scant competition. When he attends yearly childhood conferences, for example,
everybody looking like, "Hey, what you doing here? This isn't PE, anything." And I'm just like, "Yeah, I know, it's reading, how to teach kids how to read, and that's what I'm here for, to learn that." So
and then they get embarrassed, I assume.
Then it's somewhat of an embarrassment and somewhat of an intrigue. Then like, well, what made you want to do that? Like, what made you want to teach? Same thing made you want to teach. Like, you enjoy it. Especially when I was a kindergarten teacher, it was definitely like nobody could believe it. It was just like aww. And so kind of sympathetic kind of situation. So,
oh, aren't you sweet?
Yeah, aren't you sweet?
So is there something different about him? Well, he's patient. More patient than fellow coach Amos Miles, perhaps.
Hustle.
But even the ever-so-macho Miles says,
I think patience is key with that. You have to have patience with kids, doesn't matter what level you're on.
Parade made me feel proud to live in America. I really love my country.
First of all, what was happening? Before we even got to the passage, what was happening?
You don't think there's a difference in the patience required to be a kindergarten teacher as opposed to, say, a TV journalist?
I personally don't. I just feel like you got the patience for what you have patience for. You hold them to a high standard, then they will perform. And a lot of times it's like, oh, they only five. Well, that's why you don't have patience for them, because you treat them like they only 5. If you treat them like, no, you 5, you're not 4 anymore, you know how to do this, then you get a better result. So I think it's just the mind frame of going into it is one thing. People say patience, but I think it's not really patience. It's just you got to teach what you want to happen.
So what Johnson seems to have is a different mind frame.
I feel like that one thing people just have wrong impression. Just, oh, they little kids, they dirty, they got snot hanging out, they don't know how to tie their shoes, they always ask for stuff, always whining. And I always tell them, okay, I'm pretty sure you got a coworker that always asking you for stuff, that's always aggravating, that always maybe not be dirty, might have snot run out their nose too. She was too smart at that school. She didn't have any way to help her.
In fact, what struck me after spending a day with Harold Johnson is that while he's exceptional at his job, he's much like the best side of any of us. And his gender is a help, not a hindrance.
Boy teachers are more nice and they understand more and they're not as mean as girl teachers.
They understand you better because you're a boy and they're men?
Yes.
Now, girls, in my experience, are lots of fun. So I have 2 daughters. They're a lot of fun. So why is the boy teacher more fun than the girl teacher?
Because boys do more awesome stuff than girls.
On behalf of you girls, I do not think boys do more awesome stuff than girls.
But educator Angela Baum says male teachers do bring something different to the table or to the floor.
Some experts suggest that perhaps men play with children differently than women do. So men may be more likely to engage in what we call rough and tumble play. That's that vigorous, chasing, wrestling kind of play. And that's good for young children, both young boys and young girls.
There's one last aspect of Johnson's teaching worth mentioning, especially for a Making Sense segment. He teaches economics to second graders, including lessons in managing a workforce.
We did supply and demand, and then we talked about wants and needs. We bought the materials to make something, so they had instructions. So one was a sugar cookie, one was some cocoa mix, one was a winter mix, and so they had a factory assembly line. So somebody got behind, and so the people at the front was finished. The people at the back were overworked because the person in the middle was kind of slowing down. So the people at the end, they was like, well, can we get some help? I was like, no, they finished their job. So then they really got frustrated, the middle people. I asked them, well, how did that feel? And they was like, man, that's hard work. There's a lot of pressure on it. And I was like, imagine y'all was making sugar cookies. No, imagine if you really was doing something, building a car or something. So we talked about that.
Okay, one last question for those men out there who might possibly be considering if this job is for you.
How gratifying is this work?
Tremendously. I think the thing that I enjoy the most is when you see a kid have the aha moment or either change their whole perception or something. Like I've seen boys who hated reading are running to go read first. And so it's just like, man, I had something to do with that. Or if I can take this 180 days and make a lifetime of difference, then that's all worth it. And that's all worth it for me.
For the PBS NewsHour at Lake Carolina Elementary School in Blythe Woods, South Carolina, I'm economics correspondent Paul Salman.
Now to another in our brief but spectacular series. Tonight we hear from Michael Eric Dyson. He teaches at Georgetown University and is the author of Tears We Cannot Stop, a sermon to white America.
One of the greatest privileges of being white in this country is to encounter a police person on the street and live to tell about it. When many people say, let's get rid of political correctness, that's a shorthand for, let me keep on being bigoted the way I was before. As the great philosopher Sean Carter said, you was who you was before you got here, player, and you might change, but that's just the top layer. When you think about the collective white fragility of many white Americans, black people, brown people, red, yellow people, you know what we do? I'm gonna break a secret to you. We're very cautious and careful about how you might interpret things because you're very fragile. Your feelings might get hurt. You have had 44 of 45 presidents. Most CEOs of American Fortune 500 companies have been white. Where are the tears of white America coming from? To be white is to be seen as, I'm just a human being, I'm just an American, why can't you guys do the same? So many white brothers and sisters don't understand they possess a race. When you hear gender, what do we think? Oh, that must be the women. We don't think, hey, I possess a masculinity, and often it's a toxic masculinity. Many white brothers and sisters, when they hear the issue of race, they think the other. They never think themselves. It was the great late Gore Vidal who said, we live in the United States of amnesia. So America is obsessed with history when what? It's a reenactment of the Civil War, some battle that was lost in the South. So when it's about black history, why don't you people get over that? Stop obsessing about slavery. Stop talking about reparations. Stop speaking about historical oppression. Talk about what's going on now. When it makes America look great, claps, applause. When it doesn't, get out of my face. Stop living in the past. My role is, for many communities, a paid pest. That's what I do. I'm a professor. So I get paid to think about stuff that is pestiferous. I try to use humor, I try to use self-deprecation, but the ultimate goal is the same. Can we challenge the forces of unconscious white privilege and implicit bias to come out of the closet and to be held accountable? That's my job. One of my white students, after reading a book that horrendously detailed the tragedies and horrors of white violence against black people, said, "For the first time in my life, I feel ashamed to be white." I didn't want him to get stuck in a pocket of misery and guilt, because white guilt ultimately will not fix anything. You're going to get into circles that I will never get into. You're going to go home to Thanksgiving. Go home and talk to Granny, not before you eat the turkey or the stuffing or the pumpkin pie. But after that, then say to her, "You know what? I've got black and brown and red and yellow friends, and it's not what you say, or say to your cousin and your uncle, this is not how it goes down." And when we do that, we can get rid of the amnesia that has blocked a white grappling with its own problems and issues and tell the truth about race in America. My name is Michael Eric Dyson, and this is my brief but spectacular challenge to white America.
And you can watch additional brief but spectacular episodes on our website. That's pbs.org/newshour/brief. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Judy Woodruff. For all of us at the PBS NewsHour, thank you, and we'll see you soon.
You're watching PBS.